Jesus, I crave to know you, just to know you will satisfy my soul.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 211. Thank you for taking the time to join me on this next episode of Lessons in Luke. We are continuing in chapter 16 of Luke. Today we are kind of going to jump into the middle of a teaching that Jesus gives on the parable of a shrewd manager. So Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he gives this rather lengthy discussion about a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. And he goes through the scenario, and without, let's just read it. Can never have too much of the word, so let's just go through it. So chapter 16, verse 1, it says, Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that, when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And then we'll just, at the end here, add verse 14. The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. So where I really wanted to jump in and just say in part is starting in, we'll say verse 10. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? So I think that's a very profound and worthy thing for us to think on. If we have some amount in our own personal lives, some small amount, and if we're not trustworthy with that amount, then it stands to reason that we will stay in that same behavior if we were to have a large amount. Many of us think that, we have what we have to live on, and we scrape and, nickel and dime from paycheck to paycheck, and we think, well, if I just had, this much of money a month, or if I could just get this much more money, or if I'd get this raise, or if I won this lottery or what, then think of all the things that I could do with it and all the good that I can make a difference in, and just all these. We start thinking of all of these scenarios, and no doubt, probably too, you may be thinking, well, and I could give this to this church or to my church, or just think of all the good that I could do with it. Well, those are maybe grand intentions, but here Jesus himself is saying that if you cannot be trusted with even just very little, then you won't be able to be trusted with very much. And I think it's a sobering thing for us to think on, especially, as we are in the Christmas holiday season. And sometimes it tends to get very materialistic. Maybe it's good intentioned and all, but far too often in a season like this of giving and presents, and we can get wrapped up in materialistic things very easily. It doesn't take much for that to shift. And use this opportunity of this season to think, to take kind of a time out to self-assess yourself and ask, where am I in this spectrum of trustworthiness with what I have been given? Whether that's in your job, in your position that you have, the influence that you have, the way you treat those that you work with or those that you work above, those underneath you, friends or family, relatives. What is your impact on them? And of course, financially, with the money that you earn, or that you make, or that you come across, whatever the case is, take an assessment of yourself and ask, how trustworthy have I been in this? How faithful have I been with that? And if you believe that you are, as you assess yourself honestly, if you feel like you've not been faithful or trustworthy as an appropriate steward over this, because any good thing comes from God, whatever amount it is, however large or small it is, any good thing that we have comes from God, and it's His favor and grace. And so, are we good stewards of it? So let's, as we go into deeper into this holiday season, and let's take assessments of ourselves and ask the question: are we faithful in the little? And if we are, then that demonstrates, as Scripture says, then we can be faithful over much. And so maybe it's God's grace that He has kept us where we are because He knows that we're not ready for the greater, whether that's finances, position, different various changes in our life. So, as you find yourself, as I find myself frustrated in, the places that I find myself, maybe I can remember it could very well be that in God's grace, He is, foresees that if if something were different, if our finances were so much greater, or any various situational change, that we would find ourselves in a place of unfaithfulness, and with such more given to us in that place, it could be much more catastrophic to ourselves and family and others. So, just next time we find ourselves in a place of frustration, think about that as a possibility, but use this time to assess yourself and see how you measure up against Scripture. And it's a tough one. It's a tough one to chew on, but I think it's very important and sobering. And so, with that, we'll conclude this episode. I hope that it gives you something to think on. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. God bless.
I would trade a million